My name is Don Peterson. I've been a PGA golf professional since I think 1987, and I grew up in Illinois. And my first job, I was working at Gibson Woods, so I was basically washing balls and picking balls and emptying trash and things like that. I didn't become the golf professional there for several years, but then I did after college, and ended up going to Florida a few years in a row, and working down at, I worked at Disney for a stint, and then another golf course called Rosemont, and then went back and forth from Chicago to Florida several times. I went to Pelican's Nest in Naples, Florida, helped open up a Ritz-Carlton down there and a golf course, so that was a good experience. So yeah, I've been in the golf business a long, long time. I like seeing things go from bad to good. I've always liked cleaning really messy places and making them look, spick and span clean. I like taking something that's run down and making it better. So when I see a golfer who's got a terrible swing, it's like, let me at him. It's fun for me. So I've always enjoyed that, and I think I've gotten really good at it over the years, repairing people, so to speak. I was not a very good player, and I had to work at it really hard. And I shouldn't say I wasn't a very good player, I just wasn't good enough to play on the tour. So I had to work really hard to get my swing in shape. So I had to learn a lot. So I experimented a lot, I talked to a lot of different people, and I guess I educated myself for many years on the mini tours. So, those who can't play teach, right? That's the old saying. Right. But I loved it, and it was kind of, I remember as I bounced back and forth from golf courses in the north down to Florida so I could play during the winter time. What happened was, I taught a lot and I'd make extra money, and that was the extra money from teaching was to help me play on the mini tours during the winter. So the teaching led me to study the swing more, and then in the beginning, teaching was kind of weird back in the old days because there wasn't really anybody telling you how to do it. The first golf professional I had, we walked out onto the tee, and he hired me as the head of instruction at Exmoor Country Club in Chicago. And I remember his comment to me it was kind of funny. He said, "You just don't want to mess anybody up." He goes, let me ask you. So we looked at a couple people on the tee, and he says, "What do you see here? And what do you see here? What do you see here?" And I told him, and he says, "All right." He says, "You got a good eye for it." He goes, "But," he says, "You're teaching the members here." And he says, "Just don't mess anybody up." And of course, that first year when you're teaching, I remember, a couple months later, I had my first shanker. And so I sat down with the head pro there. His name was John Cleland. And I said, "What do I do with this guy?" And he goes, "Well, what do you think the problem is?" And I said, "He can't hit it on the club face." And he says, "Well, why do you think he can't do that?" And I said, "I don't know." I couldn't figure it out. So, you have to go through these learning experiences. But I remember early on, I knew that people had bad swings, and I thought there's got to be a better way to change people because it was hard to make change. So that was one of the first things that was, I think, to me, fun. I like seeing things go from bad to good. When you're figuring out the costs of what you charge for a lesson, it's not just the hour that you're teaching. You have hours. You've got to market for that lesson, right? You've got to sell the lesson. If someone comes in, then you got to sell them. So I've spent an hour talking to someone I just wanted to come take a lesson. Just like someone walks in the door and it's like they start picking your brain and you start giving them all this information saying, "Hey, this guy looks like a candidate for a lesson." You just spend a lot of time with that individual. And you're building a relationship hoping that he's going to come back and, spend $1,000. There's a lot to it. So yeah, if you're a full-time teacher, then you've got a lot of time invested, and it's not just that 1 hour that they're coming in for, that They're paying for. I think for almost 40 years now, or about 40 years, I've been teaching. And the words that I use are words that I've come up with throughout all these lessons. It's not words that I learned from books. It's not, it's not on the bone, or, it's not, I don't talk about the parts of the body or the muscles or things like that, but it's more descriptive words. I had someone one day, I was trying to get her to chip correctly, and
And so she told me one time she hit one that was perfect, and she had forward shaft lean. She had a nice chip, and I said, how would you describe that to me? She goes, it felt like I scraped it. I said, okay. So I use my students' words more than I use my words. So as I've taught, and I've given like 100,000 lessons now, and as I've taught, those are the words that I use. They don't come from science books and things like that. So when I hear all these people, I went to teaching at another summit down in Florida just recently, and one of the teachers stood up on the stage and adamantly said, the putting stroke is not a pendulum. And he was basically crucifying anybody who would say that the putting stroke is a pendulum motion. And I just sat back there and I go, who is this guy to tell someone that if I use pendulum to describe a putting motion and you make putts because I helped you with the pendulum concept, or if you said that to me, if a student came to me and said, hey, I feel like I'm rocking my shoulders and it's like a pendulum on a clock, and I said, oh, that's great, go ahead and do that. And he's able to make a lot of putts. Why is that a bad thing? But I've had people, when I tell them what I want them to do and I get a good result, and I'll say, how would you describe that to me? I've had them describe it back to me like, I don't know how they came up with that, but those are their words. So then you take notes and you use those words with them next time. So a lot of my vocabulary and the way I've learned to teach and talk to people is developed over all these lessons, not from reading books and not from medical magazines, and it's not all that stuff. So I don't know what I would tell some of these new coaches that sound, they're talking over my head and they're talking over everyone else's head too. They don't know that, I think. I don't think they realize that they're talking over everybody's head. You don't want to complicate it, you want to make it more simple. There's a lot to teaching golfers. So the education would be key. But I think the number one thing is experience. I just don't, there's a lot of people that are really smart, but can they actually help someone? I've seen brilliant people that know, and I could name a few teachers, but I won't, that I think are geniuses, but I wouldn't take a lesson from them. And I've watched, I went to the PGA Teaching and Coaching Summit several years in a row. It's kind of funny because there was one event there where they invited Jimmy Ballard, and there was a lot of controversy because he wasn't a PGA member. And it's like, oh, he's not a real golf instructor because he's not a PGA member. But then they had it wasn't really a competition, but they had a bunch of different coaches give lessons during the day, and everybody got to watch. And I wasn't at this particular event, but I talked to a lot of the pros that were, and they said that Jimmy Ballard made much better results with his students than many of the other teachers. And it was basically using his big muscles move the golf club, not small muscles. So, you over the years, you learn from things like that. And I think coaches who use hands-on and, training aids, and you have to have a lot of experience. It's like that. If you look around my studio, I've got hundreds of different training tools, and I don't use them all on everybody, but I'll use one on somebody, and I might not use it again for another year. We come across students that you want to help, but you're not sure how to help them. And there's been times when I just go home at night, I'm thinking, how can I fix this guy's swing? So it's like, I'm trying to come up with things. I'll walk through hardware stores and toy stores, and you're always looking for things that'll like relay an idea or maybe change someone's concept. Because a lot of times when you're changing someone's physical swing, you're changing their concept. And that's probably more important than making a physical change. If you change someone's concept, then they can make the swing changes themselves, or maybe they'll start altering their motion themselves. So yeah, I'm always trying to find stuff that help me relate ideas. The future of golf instruction should be that we eliminate all the negative things. And the problem with golf is that we allow people to hit a golf ball off the ground with no idea of how to do it. And I make a funny analogy. It's crazy, but if I were a gymnastics coach and someone came in, walked in the door and said, Don, I saw the Olympics on TV and I want to learn how to do a double somersault on a 4-inch beam. I wouldn't walk over and say, hey, I got a 4-inch beam, hop up there and let me see how you can do. You just wouldn't do that to someone because it's dangerous. They could break their collarbone or their neck or die. But in golf, we throw a 1.68-inch golf ball on the ground and give them a 3.5-foot stick with a little weight on the end of it and say, show me what you got. Now, they don't die and they don't break bones, but they damage themselves because they do improper sequencing, they use the wrong muscles, they get in the wrong positions, and they have poor results. You damage them mentally. They think, oh, I'm no good at this game. And then you say, okay, well, let's start fixing all of that. Early on, I recognized I had a student do the medicine ball. I bought these big leather medicine balls at a yard sale one time. And I brought them in because, Hogan had these things that, I don't know where I saw it, but, you're holding a shag bag full of balls and making little turns, like holding a weight in front of you. So I bought a medicine ball and I started doing drills. And like I said, I set up these different stations. Well, I had a physical therapist taking a lesson from me. And she said, when I had her do the medicine ball drill in front of a mirror, she said, you do the same thing I do. I said, really? I said, what do you do? And she goes, I'm a physical therapist. I said, oh, what do you call it when you train muscles like that? And she goes, it's called proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. So as soon as she said that, I said, man, I want to learn from you. So she said, why don't you come down? And she worked at Emory University Hospital, and the director of PT down there was named Cheryl Wardlaw. So she invited me down. So I tell this story a lot because it's interesting. I think I learned more from Cheryl Wardlaw than any golf professional I've ever listened to or talked to. And it's basically because she knew how to train muscles, and that interested me. So, some of my philosophies I got from her. I'll never forget one time she had all this machinery down that they used for physical therapy and training and things. And one of them was a balance machine, which was interesting because I went over there and I got on the balance machine, and this was way before, probably 15 years before they came out with balance plates and everything for golf. And I did a swing and I noticed the trace on there. So then after I looked at that, I asked her, I said, Cheryl, can you take me around and show me some of this other stuff that you train with, this equipment? Because it's fascinating. I might be able to find something I can use to train golfers. And she looked at me and she goes, Don, she goes, they spent $8 million here last year on some of this stuff. She goes, I have no idea what most of it does. She goes, what's better than this? And she held out her hands and she says, I can push and tug and pull on people. I can feel bones cracking or creaking or muscles, and I can respond immediately if the student says, ooh, that hurts, or no, don't do that, right? It's nothing better than this. And so as soon as she said that, I recognized the same thing. It's like, I don't think a good golf professional will ever be replaced by any training machines or anything like that, because what can be better than someone using their hands correctly? So I'm a hands-on teacher. I believe in that. The other philosophy I got from her that was fascinating was she told me one time a guy came in to her from 2 other doctors had referred this patient to her, and he was a quadriplegic. They told him he was basically never going to move from his neck down. So they rolled him in, and she looked him in the eye and said, Mr. Johnson, I'm going to assume that you're capable of full bodily function until you tell me that you can't, or until you prove to me that you can't. And I just thought that was kind of fascinating because it's kind of the way I look at students. If they can walk in on 2 legs, swinging their arms, I'm going to assume that they can do what I think they can do with golf swing until they prove to me that they can't. So I think that's a philosophy that's different than a lot of other golf coaches or trainers out there. Because most people like to look at individual swings and they just assume that that's what this person's capable of, but they don't really know for sure unless they train them correctly. And I think that's where there's room for much more improvement with coaches in the future. Do it your way. Be yourself and find your own niche, so to speak. I think that's probably one of the most important things. There's a lot of golf coaches and instructors and that I admire, but they don't do what I do. I do things completely differently, and I have my own expertise. I didn't want to work for other golf professionals when I was younger. I was kind of arrogant or cocky. I guess, at one point,
Guys like Jack Nicklaus and Tiger Woods, they're arrogant and cocky because they know they're the best player in the world. And at one point, I felt like I was the best teacher in the world. It's like I couldn't learn anything from anybody. I looked at what other people were doing, and I go, I'm way, way past what they're doing. So I got kind of arrogant and cocky, and I went out and I just wanted to do things on my own. Had I worked my way up through a golf academy, or maybe I got involved with a golf school or stayed at a private club, who knows where my career could have gone, and maybe I would have gotten somewhere faster or made more money. But I kind of took my own road, and I did things the way I wanted to. And I think I educated myself completely differently than I would have been if I'd listened to someone else. So I'm really glad that I experimented and did things my way, because no one would have taught me what I did. I had a student of mine who I really respected, multimillionaire, very successful guy. And at one point I was struggling financially, I would say, and I just leased a driving range, and I was trying to make a go of the driving range, and it was tough. And he told me one time, he goes, Don, he said, and I think I was kind of self-conscious, or wasn't very proud. I wasn't very proud of myself. And he said, Don, he says, you've done something that most people in the world never do. He goes, you can make your own living. And he says, most people have to rely on a boss. They have to rely on a job. They have to rely on a company. And he goes, you don't. You've made your way in the world. He says, you can teach golf the rest of your life. And I thought that was nice of him to say, and it also kind of opened my eyes. I wrote a book called Baseball Golf because there's a lot of similarities between not so much hitting a baseball, but actually throwing a baseball. Because I think a good golf swing is just a good underhand throwing motion into the back of the ball. You're throwing the club head through the golf ball towards the target. So I think the better you are at throwing, the better you can be. So I try to make it a simple athletic motion. We've evolved over 1 million years throwing rocks and walnuts at animals. So human beings are good at throwing things. Try to make my golfers swing efficiently, and that's actually easier. So then if I can get them to do that, then golf becomes an easier game. And baseball would be, and football would be, and all these sports are better if you're efficient. So I always tell people, I wrote the baseball golf book, but I could have called it tennis golf or football golf or highlight golf or bowling golf, because you use all these, there's analogies. I had a professional bowler come to me one time, and we talked about the similarities between golf and bowling. And I had a professional handball player come to me one time, and he talked about how, he says, I have a killer serve, and he said, I just tied my elbow to my hips. He goes, so I didn't move my forearm or my hand, I just swung my hips. So you hear all these things, and you start realizing, karate is the same, martial arts, and you're tying it together with all these other sports. Oh, hey, you looking for a game? Come on, you can join us. Don't forget, like, subscribe, and ring that bell, and we'll notify you next time we come out for a game.